my over-attachment to Chutz La'aretz, I'm actually going to talk about last week's Parsha, which is the Parsha that's going to be read in Chutz La'aretz. And what are we doing here? Yeah. You know, as you know, whenever the day after our Yom Tov is on Shabbos, so in Chutz La'aretz, that is Yom Tov, so the Parsha of the week will not be read until the next Shabbos. So we read Parshas Naso last Shabbos, but in America or everywhere else they're going to read it this Shabbos. And I want to share with you a thought from last week's Parsha, which I think is very relevant to our avoda right now. First, let me just say, I don't know how many of you went to Bnei Brak 2 days ago for the Levaya of Rav Edelstein. If you went, you probably were not able to get particularly close to where the nifter was. And I don't know if you were able to hear the Hespedim. But it is important to acknowledge that he was a very, very great man and a very great tzaddik. And most of his life, he basically taught 17-year-olds. You know, he was a great Rosh Yeshiva, a great Gaon, but his Talmidim were like 17-year-old kids. And he taught them with great patience and great devotion and great love. And one of his hallmarks was that even though he was involved with, you might say, the whole Jewish people, he always focused on the individual person. Like he noticed if you were not feeling right, you were not doing well, he would zero in on you as an individual. And that's really kind of the hallmark of a true gadol, that a true gadol is not only concerned with the nation, the big things, but to a true gadol, there is nothing too small for him to pay attention to, for him to care about. And in that sense, we should try to imitate him. You know, it is said that when a great person leaves the world, there's a tremendous vacuum. There's a tremendous emptiness. I'll make up a number, just a made-up number. Let's imagine that there were 1 million gallons of Kedusha, and it was all taken away. So now we have emptiness. We have a void. So we have to fill that void. Now, none of us has 1 million gallons of Kedusha, so to speak. So no one of us could fill the void of such a great person. But each of us can do a little bit. And if enough of us do a little bit, we can kind of fill it up. So we learn a little bit more. We do a little bit more chesed. We care about our fellow Jew more than we were doing before. We daven with a little bit more kavanah. When we make a bracha on water, or even go to the bathroom, we think about the words that we're saying. So we do a little bit more, a little bit different, a little bit better than we were doing before. Enough people do that over enough time, then eventually you kind of fill up the swimming pool with all of that we lost. And in that way, the tzaddik continues to live, because all of the goodness that he brought to the world, we kind of take that challenge up and we bring it into the world as well. So it'd be something to think about. You know, as I say, I already said a number of times, you know, the nifter died at the age of 100. So it's not a tragic death in the sense like, you know, somebody dies at 25, you know, there was so much promise that was not realized. Yeah, man died at 100. I mean, we're all, you know, halvai v'halvai. We should merit to live to 100 or 120. But, you know, until the resurrection of the dead, death is inevitable. So in a sense, this is not like a tragic, shocking death that a man dies at the age of 100. But once again, the sadness is not over his death. He's with Hashem in Olam Haba. The sadness is we've been deprived of a leader and a role model and an inspiration and a source of blessing in the world. So he could be 250, it would be the same issue, meaning it's not what he lost, it's what we lost. And we lose it no matter what the age of the gadol is. And that's why we do have this sadness when the great leaders leave this world, even though, Baruch Hashem, they tend to be of fairly advanced age. Baruch Hashem, we've had quite a few gedolim that have in Eretz Yisrael who lived beyond the age of 100. We've had some who died young as well. but there's still going to be a sadness. So, Yehi Zichro Baruch, may his memory be a blessing. May we continue to learn and emulate from Rav Gershon's ways. So the thing I wanted to share with you is a mitzvah in last week's Parsha, in which 3 different camps of the Jewish people were set up. The Mishkan and the courtyard around the Mishkan are called Machane Shechina, the camp of the divine presence. Around the Machane Shechina is where the Leviim lived. That's called Machane Levia. And then around them on all 4 sides, there were the Yisraelim in groups of 3 tribes each, right? To the east, the west, the north, and the south. There was Machane Yehuda, right? The marketplace is named after the camp of Yehuda. There was Machane Ephraim, there was Machane Ruvain, etc., Machane Dan. In other words, these were the leading tribes, but each one had 3 tribes, equaling 12. So we have 3 camps: Machane Shechina, Machane Levia, Machane Yisrael. And when these camps were set up, Moshe was commanded to expel from these camps people that are ritually impure. And there are 3 impurities that are mentioned. Expel from the camp the tsarua, the leper, the person with leprosy. The zav, now the zav is a person, it's really a gonorrhea. It's a sexually transmitted disease, and it's referring to a flow, but it's not a seminal emission. It's a flow of infected pus. Zav. The zav is tamei as well. And the third case of tuma is tamei nefesh, a person who's come in contact with a dead body. So expel the leper, expel the zav, expel the tamei meis. Now, to make life a little more complicated, the Gemara explains, and Rashi brings this Gemara, that the expulsion of these 3 groups is not the same. The Metzora is expelled from all 3 groups. The Metzora is in quarantine. The Metzora is isolated. The Metzora is expelled from Machane Shechina, Machane Levia, and Machane Yisrael, meaning he's outside the camp. The Zav is expelled from Machane Shechina and Machane Levia, that if he's a Levi, he does not go there, but he is permitted to reside in Machane Yisrael. The Tamei Meis, the one who's come in contact with a dead body, is even more lenient. He's not allowed in Machane Shechina. He is allowed in the camp of the Levites, and he is allowed in the camp of the Yisraelim. So, even though we have 3 categories of Tamei who are expelled, but the camp from which they're expelled differs between the 3 categories. The Metzora is expelled from all 3 camps until he gets purified. The Metzora can get purified. All of these tumas, these are not life sentences. There are purification rituals, but until the Metzora is purified, he is expelled from all 3 camps. The Zav is expelled from 2 camps, but is allowed in the 3rd camp. The Tamei Meis is only expelled from the Shechina camp and is allowed in the other 2. By the way, let me just explain something. Before I get into the thought I want to share with you, let's just contemporize this a little bit. In the Midbar, we had the 3 camps, Shechina, Levia, Yisrael. How do we characterize these camps today? What would the halachic equivalent of these camps be? So, Machane Yisrael today is the old city of Jerusalem. Any city in Eretz Yisrael with a wall, meaning this would not be Machane Yisrael, meaning a Metzora would, if God forbid, somebody had leprosy, you would be allowed to live here. You don't have to be in mamish isolation, but you could not be in the old city. So Machane Yisrael are cities with a wall that gives them a special kedusha. Machane Levia, the halachic equivalent of the Levite camp, is the outer perimeter of the Temple Mount, just beyond the Kotel. Machane Shechina the place of the Mishkan, that would be the inner part of the Temple Mount. Now, let me explain something to you. I'm going to oversimplify because it is a more complicated question. And that is, most of you generally know that in the Torah world, generally speaking, with some exceptions, we do not encourage people going on the HaRav. Right? You go up to the Western Wall, but you don't go on the other side. Now, what's the problem? Putting aside politics, there are political issues here, which are very significant. But putting aside politics, what is the pure halachic problem with going on the HaRav? Answer: all of us today are in a ritually impure state of contact with a dead body because you've been in a cemetery. If you were in a cemetery once in your life, you are a tameh until you are sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer. In the absence of a red heifer, I'm tameh. Now, I'm not a mitzorah and I'm not a zav. I'm a tameh meis. Now, a tameh meis is allowed in Machane Yisrael, which would be the old city, no problem. And a tameh meis is even allowed in the Levite camp, which would be the outer rim of the Temple Mount. But a tameh met is not allowed in the inner part of the Temple Mount because that has the status of the camp of the divine presence. So, with this, you can understand the machlokas between, let's say, the Haredi poskim and the Dati Leumi, the Zionist religious poskim. Everybody admits, in theory, a tameh met is permitted in what is called the outer perimeter of the Temple Mount because that's only the Levite camp. And everybody admits a tameh met is not allowed in the inner part of the Temple Mount because that's Machane Shechina. There is no machlokas on those rules. Everybody would say the outer one is technically okay and the inner one is usher. That's for sure. The machlokas is, how confident are you in identifying inner and outer? Because when you try to superimpose the Beis HaMikdash over the present Temple Mount, there are different configurations that could be established. Going this way, that way, etc. How do you measure the distances? So the Haredi world takes the position that since it is really difficult to be able to demarcate what is outer, what is inner, and inner for sure is usher, so don't go at all. It's like walking in a minefield, right? How confident would you be if somebody said, you can walk through this minefield as long as you stay 3 inches away from this row. Okay, that's safe. There's no mine within 3 inches. Well, that's great, but I wouldn't feel that secure walking 3 inches away from a mine. I mean, what if I sneeze? What if I trip? Whatever it would be. So the Haredi poskim basically say, don't go on the Temple Mount because you might inadvertently cross the border. And if you cross the border, it's a very serious aveira. The Dati Leumi poskim will permit it. Say, we have a boundary. We know what's inner, what's outer. In other words, the point I want to make is that this is not really a machlokas in halachic principle. This is just a machlokas in halachic application. How confident are you that you will avoid the red line? I mean, listen, the Arabs don't give you. I mean, there is no official red line. You got to follow your posek as to where it is, right? The Arabs are not giving you a line. I mean, their red line is Jews shouldn't be in Jerusalem at all. I mean, that's their. In fact, their red line is the country of Israel, and the like. Okay, so I just want to point out that this is not, as I say, this is not a machlokas in principle. This is a machlokas in how prudent should you be or need to be in life. Okay, but now what I want to share with you is a beautiful thought. Oh yes, another point though. Keep in mind that a zav, a gonorrheal discharge, does include a man with a regular seminal emission and a woman that menstruated, that's a nida. So since that category is not only excluded from Machane Shechina, but is also excluded from Machane Leviah, So a man with a seminal emission who hasn't gone to a mikveh, or a woman that's a nida, could absolutely not enter the Temple Mount under any part of it, because even the outer part of the Temple Mount is at least the camp of the Levites. Which would mean that any single women don't go to the mikveh. Any single woman cannot enter the Temple Mount under any circumstances. And any married woman, even if she is a nida, would not be allowed to enter. Any man with a seminal emission who didn't go to the mikveh wouldn't be allowed to enter. So the truth is, if you see women on the Temple Mount, they are not following halakha. They're not religious. There are people who are just not religious who go to the Temple Mount. But anyone that is going based on following halakha, the woman could not possibly be a nida. That would be because a nida would have the same halakha as a zav, and the zav is expelled even from machna leviyah. Okay. But the main point I want to share with you is more of the philosophy of this. And that is, why do we have these three different layers of the Metzora, the Zav, and the Tamei Meis? So there's a beautiful explanation by Rav Tzadok. Rav Tzadok of Lublin, the great Hasidic Rebbe, he died in 1900. And Rav Tzadok says that the concept of Tuma is an externalized reflection of certain spiritual imperfections of character. Now, all of us know Pirkei Avos, the famous teaching of Pirkei Avos, that the world stands on three pillars: the study of Torah, divine service by sacrifice and prayer. That's the second one. And the third one is Gemilas Chasadim, acts of loving kindness. In fact, this represents Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov in reverse order. Yaakov, who studied for 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, represents Torah learning. Yitzchak, who was a sacrifice to God, represents divine service. And Avraham Avinu, whose tent was open to all of the travelers, represents loving kindness. Right? So these are our three pillars: Torah, Avoda, Gemilas Chasadim. But there's another Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Just as these are the three pillars that build up the world, there are three negative forces that destroy the world. And this is kina, jealousy, envy; taiva, lust for hedonistic pleasures; and kavod, the desire for glory, ego gratification, self-aggrandizement. Kina, taiva, kavod. Motziin es ha'adam min ha'olam. They take a person out of the world. That actually means, number one, you lose your olam haba, but it also means even your olam hazeh is pretty miserable. If you're always jealous over what other people have, you'll never enjoy what you have, meaning your life will be miserable not only in the world to come, your life will be miserable in this world as well. Right? So on the positive side of the ledger, we have Torah, Avoda, Gemilas Chasadim. On the negative side of the ledger, we have Kina, Taiva, V'Kavod. So here's Rav Tzadok's basic thoughts. When we banish the Tameim from the camp, we're really banishing the negative forces of Kina, Taiva, V'Kavod. The Metzora represents the force of jealousy. I'll explain why. The Zav represents the force of Taiva. And the Tamei Meis represents the force of Kavod. So when you read, expel the Metzora, expel the Zav, expel the Tamei Nefesh, what you're really saying is, get rid in your society of Kina, Taiva, Kavod. Now, why is that so? Why is the Metzora connected to jealousy and the Zav to Taiva and the Tamei Meis to Kavod? Well, the Metzora, right? Metzora is like a white blotch of... In fact, saras is not really leprosy. The closest word in English to saras is psoriasis, which actually is connected to the Hebrew of tsaras. But don't worry, if you have psoriasis, it generally does not meet the definition of tsaras. But tsaras is a white blotch of skin discoloration on your skin. And it is not a contagious disease. It is not a medical condition per se. It manifests itself as a condition, but it comes from a spiritual imperfection. And the primary sin which causes leprosy, I'll use the conventional translation, is lashon hara, disparaging remarks about other people, even if they're true. Right? Lashon hara is the main reason for tsaras. Now, if we probe deeper and we ask ourselves, why do we engage in so much lashon hara? Why do we like to put people down? Why do I like to say bad things about people? And a lot of times, it's because of jealousy. I look at somebody, he's richer than me, he's handsomer than me, he has a better marriage than me, he has a better job than me. And I don't feel good about that. I feel jealous. I feel I should be better than him, or I am better than him. So what I tend to do, psychologically, when people are saying how great this guy is, I'll say, he's not as great as people think he is, he's this and that and that and that. Meaning, jealousy and insecurity, in a large part, is what motivates us to speak lashon hara. I want to pull people down because I'm not that comfortable. We're never comfortable when relationships are not equal. If you're up here and I'm down here, I'm not so comfortable, right? In fact, that's the famous psychological point that sometimes you have this big, powerful boss. He always sits higher than you, like his chair is on a platform and you're kind of the supplicant below. It's an old psychological trick to kind of make one person more dominant over the other person. So I'm not comfortable with that. So our first points out, if you're up here and I'm down here, I want us to be more equal. But there are two ways of making us equal. I could try to lift myself up, or I could try to pull you down. Gravity is an easier force to work with. It's easier for me to pull you down than to lift me up. To lift me up, I'd have to work, I'd have to study, I'd have to learn, I'd have to exercise, whatever it would be. But if I just want to pull you down, all I have to do is talk, and I can pull you down. So it's a safe assumption, not 100% of the time, that lashon hara correlates with jealousy. And therefore, so this is the association. Mitzora equals lashon hara equals jealousy. Expel the mitzora means expel jealousy from your camp. Now, jealousy is such an evil, pernicious characteristic that we don't want it to exist in any part of Klal Yisrael. Not only in the camp of the Shekhinah, and not only in the camp of the Levites, but even in the camp of the Israelites, which you might call ordinary life, ordinary people, regular people. Get rid of it. It's not going to help you. It's not going to help society. It's not going to make it a better world. It's not going to make it a better Jewish people. It's not going to make you better. So the Mitzayra is expelled from all three camps because there is no utility. There is no benefit in the negative force of jealousy. Now, you might ask me a kasha on this from a Gemara. The Gemara actually says, Kinas Sofrim, the jealousy of Torah scholars, Tarbe Chochma, increases wisdom. I see you learning till 12 o'clock at night, and I don't want you to be so much better than me, so I'm going to stay up till 12 o'clock at night, right? Competition. Competition can be harnessed as a motivating force. So why am I saying jealousy is totally bad? Jealousy could be positive. The answer is there are two types of jealousy. There's the jealousy that you're good and I want to be as good as you, or you're good and I want to pull you down. The jealousy that is hoping that somebody will fail, there is no positive benefit in that. But the jealousy that motivates me, maybe we shouldn't even use the word jealousy, but if I look at you as a good example and I want to be motivated, to do my best. That could be a motivator. Now, it's not the highest motivator. That's not learning Torah for the sake of God, but it's a motivator. That's called not lishma. And what do Chazal say? You should learn Torah and mitzvos, even if it's not lishma, because from the not lishma, you will come eventually to the lishma. What do they say? They say there was a great rabbi who was learning, and his window was directly opposite another great rabbi's apartment who was also learning. So I'm in the window with my light on, and you're in the window with your light on. And the rabbi would notice that he would shut off his light at 1 a.m, and the light next door was still on. So the rabbi figured, if the guy next door is still learning, I could also learn a little extra, right? So each one use the other one as the motivator to kind of increase their Torah study. Okay, now, so that's the connection between mitzora and jealousy. And that's why the mitzora is expelled from all three camps. Now, the next evil thing is taiva, lust. Lust is materialism, hedonism, the need for sensual pleasures, whether it's eating, drinking, sexual relations, whatever it is. Now, the connection between a zav and taiva is pretty apparent because zav, gonorrhea, is indeed a sexually transmitted disease, so the association is very clear. But here, the subtlety is the following. Our relationship to taiva is actually much more complicated than our relationship to kina. When it comes to kina, as hard as it is to eradicate kina, and it is very hard, but in theory, I can just say it is no good. Shouldn't exist. In theory. Lamaisa, can I get rid of it? Maybe not. But in theory, there is nothing good about it. Taiva is very different. Because a certain amount of sensual pleasure is necessary in life. You have to eat. That's why they say food addictions, to the degree that you characterize something as a food addiction, is the hardest addiction to break. Because you can't go cold turkey, no pun intended. In other words, I could try with smoking, and I could just break it. But by eating, I have to get involved. So it's like telling an alcoholic, restrict yourself to 2 drinks a day is much harder for an alcoholic than not drinking at all. Right? So that's the problem with the food addiction, because you have to eat. So we have to eat. We're supposed to get married and have intimacy with our wives, right? And not only that, not only is it something we're supposed to do, but in terms of avodas Hashem, a person appreciates beauty, a person appreciates color and music, and what we call pleasurable activities. It puts him in a better frame of mind to be able to serve God. It creates a sense of gratitude and awe. So if I could say jealousy is all bad, I can't really say taiva is all bad, because a certain amount of taiva is necessary for life, and it actually helps you in serving God. So it's a more complex relationship, meaning you have to indulge in taiva, but with moderation, with balance. That's a much more difficult thing. So here's the remez. The Baal Taiva, the Zav, is allowed in the Israelite camp, because the Israelite camp represents ordinary life. In ordinary life, we indulge taivas to some degree. But as you progress spiritually to become the Levi is totally devoted to the service of God, your relationship to taiva will get weaker and weaker and more attenuated. Now this is a subtle point, not by a self-conscious course of renunciation, but simply because you've grown up. I mean, the example is this. It's not that, I'd love to have this cake, but I'm not going to eat it because it's a taiva. It's a different thing. As you grow in your learning, you just become less interested in a lot of that stuff. I mean, an example. Adults tend not to play with children's toys unless they're playing with their children. Now, adults have their own toys. I understand that. But, An adult is not going to play with a child's toys. Now, that's not a process in which the adult says, I'm not going to play with that toy because I'm a grown-up. It's not how it works. It's just, it no longer interests you. So, as you graduate to become Levi, focused on service of God, Mimela means automatically. You'll be less connected to the taivas because they'll become like childish things. You know, it's not like Rav Yosef had to struggle not to eat ice cream. That wasn't what somebody said. It's a tough standard. Somebody asked Rav Yosef a shayla, it's a halachic shayla. In a bread meal, when you're given ice cream at the end of the meal, do you make a separate bracha on the ice cream? It's a halachic shayla, as you know. Some people will make a shahakol because it's a dessert, and other people maintain that on ice cream you do not make a separate bracha. So the person asked Rav Yosef Shita on it. So Rav Yosef refused to answer. He just said to the person, you mean you still eat ice cream? That was the only thing he asked. He didn't want to answer the question. So of course the guy could just say, oh, I'm asking for my kids. But okay. But you see the point that I'm making? I mean, this is actually an important point. It's not the notion, I renounce taiva. It's the notion that it no longer interests me that much because I'm into something better. So, do you see the point here? So that's why, unlike the Mitzayra, which is totally negative and is expelled from all three camps, the Zav, which is taiva, has a place in ordinary life, but the Levi, which is the Madrega of Avodas Hashem, and certainly the Shekhinah connection to God, you're less involved in the taiva, and that's why the Zav is expelled from Shekhinah and Levi, but is allowed in Machaneh Yisrael. Now, we now come to the third category of Tamei Meis. Now, Tamei Meis, impurity due to contact with death, is connected to kavod. Now, this is not immediately apparent. What's the shaychus? What's the connection between the tumah of a dead body and kavod? So here's Rav Tzadok says the following. Originally, it was God's plan that Adam and Chava were to live forever. We were supposed to be immortal. We were supposed to be eternally living. Death came into the world because of the sin of the tree of knowledge, the Eitz of Das. What enticed the Nachash, right? How did the Nachash entice Chava and then Adam to eat? So Rav Tzadok says it really was a kavod argument, because the Nachash said to Chava, the day that you eat from this fruit, you will be like God, knowing and mastering good and evil. So imagine, like the Matrix, somebody gives you a pill, right? The blue pill, the red pill. Somebody gives you a pill, says, take this pill and you will be God. Wow. Talk about the ultimate ego trip. Now, whatever the Nachash meant, we're not even sure what the Nachash meant. But the Nachash's enticement was, you will be like God. So what was the Achilles heel, so to speak, that tripped up Adam and Chava? It was the hubris, it was the arrogance of thinking they could be God. Now, in many, many ways, we are godlike. Human beings are made in the image of God. And that means there are aspects of our character, our wisdom, our rationality, our creativity that are godlike. And we can create things, we can destroy things. There are many, many things human beings are capable of doing, both on the good side and on the bad side. But death is the ultimate reminder that as brilliant as we are, as powerful as we are not God. Mortality is the chasm between the Creator and the created. And therefore, death came into the world to remind man that he is not God. In other words, the vice that brought death into the world was kavod. And therefore, kavod creates that tumah, that distancing from God. So now, here is the thing though. On one hand, arrogance and pride are very destructive and very evil. On the other hand, you need a certain measure of pride, not only in your physical life, but in your spiritual life. You have to know that you matter. You have to know that your avoda is significant to Hashem. If I truly believed I was nothing, if I truly believed I was worthless, why should I learn? Why should I daven? Why should I do anything? Why would I think? And what gives me the right to even believe that Hashem cares about me? Elamai, side by side with the need to be humble, there needs to be an awareness of your greatness. Right? This is the famous statement attributed to the Hasidic Rebbe, Rabbunim of Pershischa, that you have to have two ideas in your pocket, one pocket each. In one pocket, Anochi afar v'efer, I am dust and ashes, I am nothing. In the other pocket, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, because of me, the world was created. What does that mean? Hashem made many cows and many dogs and many cats and many rabbits. But he only made one man and one woman. Why is that? Why didn't Hashem make many people? Answer, because Hashem wanted us to realize that even for one person, the whole universe was worthwhile. And that one person can be me. But that's not arrogance, because the same way the universe was created just for me, it was created just for you. So that doesn't make me look down at anybody, but it makes me realize how special I am in God's eyes. So, if our relationship to kina is a simple one, kina is all bad, in theory. And if our relationship to taiva is, well, taiva is okay in ordinary life, but as you graduate, you should be less involved in it as a natural consequence of growing up. Kavod is even more complex. The tamei meis that represents kavod, because that's what brought death into the world, not only gains admission in the ordinary life of the Israelite camp, but even in the service of God camp of Levites, you need a sense of kavod that you matter. So the tamei meis gains admission into the Levite camp. The only thing is, at the point that you're truly united with God, you've reached that highest level. At that point, you no longer need your ego. Your ego is kind of like a rocket that gets you out of the atmosphere. But once you're there, you don't need anything. You're just with God. You don't need any sense of yourself. Right? So most of us need a sense of ego, even in our learning and even in our davening, because we have to know that our divine service matters. But there is a point at which, and maybe we'll never reach it, but there is a point of self-transcendence where your ego no longer plays any role at all in your relationship to Hashem. You become merged with God, and that's why Machne Shechina, the tamei meis, doesn't go in. So this is, again, a little bit of a complicated idea, but Rav Tzadok is explaining very beautifully why the three levels of Tuma, Mitzora, Zov, tamei meis, correspond to Kina, Taiva, Kavod, okay? And based on the need or lack of need of Kina, Taiva, Kavod, that explains why the Mitzora is expelled from all three camps. The Zav is expelled from Shechina and Leviah, but is allowed in Machane Yisrael. And the tamei meis even gets into Yisrael and Levi, but is expelled once we enter the actual camp of the Shekhinah. Right? So this actually explains those three levels of Tameim. Okay, have a wonderful Shabbos.